Back, y'all. We got a new subject because it dropped today. A press release and a press conference happened, and it is official. The Nations Cup has officially been approved by World Rugby. Now, absolutely changing rugby as we officially know it. Moving forward, going into this next Rugby World Cup, and what this international schedule is absolutely going to be about. So, just to kind of put it into context, let's talk about this. Man, you need you to pull up. All right. So, what is the Nations Cup now? All right. The Nations Cup is almost exactly the same concept as the WXV tournament. It is a multi-divisional tournament that is used to be able to create not just a pathway into the Rugby World Cup that is now expanding from 20 to 24 teams, but it is also a means of being able to try and find a way to create better rankings and increase play, as it's been said by World Rugby. That's with Bill Beaumont. Now, to kind of break it down a little bit more, what is it going to involve? All right. What it involves is Division One is going to include the Six Nations teams. That is Ireland, France, England, Wales, Italy, and Scotland. The Rugby Championship teams, that is obviously New Zealand, Australia, and Argentina. And then it's going to feature Fiji and Japan. And if y'all don't even realize, if you have heard me in the past, I said in this Rugby World Cup, I no longer consider Fiji to be a tier 2 team. Now that they are allowed to have their players come in to play from them for other teams, especially the professional side, and now they're getting more investment inside their league, and also the additioning of the Fijian Druas to the Super Rugby. They are now playing as a tier 1 team, and obviously World Rugby considers them a tier 1 team as well. Division 2 is going to include all the teams that are ranked basically 13 to 24. Now, the thing that's going to be a part of it is that there's no regulation. There's going to be no relegation from in and out of tier 1 until 2030. But the first competitions are going to take place in 2026. And it happens every other year. So what that means officially is that no teams are going to be able to come in and out of the Division 1, Division 2 of this international schedule until after the USA's first Rugby World Cup. That's in 2032. So 2026, 2028, 2030, tier 2 teams are basically playing tier 2 teams. Tier 1 teams are playing tier 1 teams, regardless of whether or not they are good or not. Another faction that's going to be made from this is that Sanazar, which is basically the Southern Hemisphere team, South Africa, New Zealand, and the islands and the Six Nations are going to be running this Nations Cup. So this isn't technically a World Rugby. This isn't technically a World Rugby event. It is a Sanazar and Six Nations event allowed by World Rugby, which I think is very important to denote, especially in terms of what we want to expect from growth. Now, this has been very much pushed back. All right. I think there's been very much mixed opinions with this. For me, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what the full impact is. Now, on one hand, you get a lot of opinions that this is going to hinder the growth of tier 2 nations. We saw, a lot of spectacular play during this Rugby World Cup, especially late with teams like Portugal, who have shown themselves to be increasing their play, getting more serious about their play, and really being something to be contended. Obviously, Georgia has been one that has been talked about being entered into the Six Nations for a very long time. And then, of course, now you also have teams like Uruguay, who has seen success, maybe not to an extent of wins, but we definitely have seen the progress of that program growing, and how they did even in pool play, taking teams to their brink despite the fact I think the game against France was obviously one of the biggest surprises at the struggle that France had against Uruguay, even though they ultimately ended up winning that game. So the question is, can tier 2 teams actually develop their players over time if they don't get a chance to play against any tier 1 nations? The other half of this is, and this was spoken a lot within the press conference that was held literally today. So that's Tuesday, October 24th, by Bill Beaumont, which basically was like, yo, this is going to be a chance for teams, tier 2 teams especially, to increase their schedules by 50% over the course of the 2 years leading, over the course of the years leading into the Rugby World Cup, because a lot of tier 2 nations have difficulty of finding games or being able to schedule or being able to create certainty out of these matches, out of their matches. And so they ultimately don't get enough development on the field to be able to be competitive overall. Now, you can say that that makes sense as well. What is it that is required to improve your rugby? Is it iron sharpening iron, where you see tier 1 nations take on a tier 2 nation, and honestly, majority of the time it ends up being an absolute blowout? Is that good for the tier 1 nation? Probably not. They may get to see their backups play. It's not particularly an entertaining product, and you don't necessarily get to see the stars. On the flip side of it, for the tier 2 nations, while you do get a chance to play against a tier 1 and kind of see where you're going with it, do you learn that much from your blowout? Is it ultimately that you don't have talent, or are you even creating an attraction for new players to be able to enter into the game and find a way to actually want to be part of this experience and this mission to be able to move it forward? Then the other part of this is obviously the money side of it. I think that part probably is more demarcatively heavier to the development and the growth of rugby than probably anything else. Because as of this moment, I think we can all say in some way, shape, or form that when it comes to how we're able to maneuver and be mobile in rugby is where we can travel to and who we can compete with. I think anybody that's played in a club team knows the cost of going to a tournament, or the cost of being able to play overseas or bring teams to you. I know, especially in the US, it's one of the best bonding experiences is being able to travel, but it can also be one of the most arduous ones, just trying to be able to figure it out and even take that to the next step in the international levels. And we have so many countless conversations. I remember a couple of years ago having a conversation with Sarah Sal, who talked about the monetary issues that USA Rugby itself had. Despite being this large nation, obviously USA Rugby has a lot of monetary issues, and that impacts the women's game as much as the men's game. And so, like, to be able to have a consistency schedule, be able to know that you might not get to see competition against the tier 1 teams, might create a little bit more interesting games against the competition that you're in. Simultaneously, if you're increasing the amount of play, it means that players can maybe get a little bit more ready. And of course, you can also test more new players into the system to see if you can get better fluidity, can get better action, and then most importantly, can give sponsors some level of certainty of what is going to happen, where games are going to be played, where it's going to be produced or distributed at, or whatever. And obviously, this all leads running into the Rugby World Cup, because we're not waiting until 2031 to see what the effects are. It's 2027 that's coming up first and foremost to be able to see the impact of the Nations Cup. The WXV tournament, which is getting just horribly placed into the schedule during Rugby World Cup times, is one that also needs to be talked about. But it's doing the same thing for the women. It's trying to build consistency in the tournaments, consistency in play. So for me, I don't think this is as bad, despite it being a closed system this next, basically 6 years. But I know that I don't like the fact that these tier 1 teams are really trying to protect themselves, because it does inhibit population growth in terms of fandom. And I think you need to increase population growth as much as you also need to increase your essential commercial growth. In fact, the two go hand in hand. Obviously, we can talk all the way down to the grassroots level, but in the situation as we know it right now, this is anybody. This stands out the most in making sure that you're growing the game correctly. Now, one aspect of this that really came out about the new changes to the international rugby schedule was